Welcome to the thestrangelandpodcast. I am your host, Stefan, and I'm here with my co-host, Kenny.
What's going on, everybody?
How are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I was off work, unlike you.
Yeah, definitely. I am glad to be here, though. It's been a rough day, but hey, I've been looking forward to this all day, man, so I'm glad to be here with you.
Yeah, most definitely.
So today, guys, pretty interesting case. We're going to cover the Poppin Sisters. So basically, I'll give you a brief overview here. They were two maids that were sisters. They worked as live-in maids, essentially, and they murdered their employer's wife and daughter. So we'll break it all down here, but that's basically what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, and just as a disclaimer, and this is a real disclaimer, this all happened in France in the early 1930s, and a lot of these names are sort of hard for us to pronounce, and we looked into it and we tried to look up all the ways to say these names, but if we mess something up as far as the way we pronounce a name, we tried our best.
Yeah, we're two Texans, so we're trying. I think we did pretty good, though.
Yeah.
I'll just say that right away.
Yeah, I think we did okay.
I'm proud of myself. I learned something.
Like Stefan said, we're talking about the Poppin Sisters, and they grew up in. There were three children. The names were Amelia, Christine, and Lea. Amelia was born in 1901. Christine was born in 1905, and Lea was born in 1911. And the two main girls we're talking about today are women, are Christine and Lea. And the children, they grew up in villages south of Le Mans. Le Mans is a principal city in the province of Maine in France. And I've heard of Le Mans. If anyone is a car racing person listening to this right now, there's something called the 24-hour of Le Mans. It's one of the biggest races in the world where they race the same car around a track for 24 hours without stopping, only changing out drivers.
That's insane. I had no idea of this, by the way,
so
until you told me.
This race is a big race, and that's sort of how I think that's how the world best knows Le Mans. But it did happen. The murder did take place in this city.
Yeah, and so I guess we should explain their family dynamics first. I mean, these two girls, or three girls really, were raised in a terrible environment. So they were the children of Gustave Poppin and his wife Clemence. And interestingly enough, this is a similar sort of story that gets told over and over, but their father was an abusive alcoholic. He was known for being a really violent guy. He would abuse his wife and his family alike. Their mother, interestingly enough, was seen as unfit for the most part. She wanted nothing to do with her kids. She would send them away any chance she could.
Yet she continued to have kids,
Yeah.
But I think, in this case, we don't really talk about Gustave very much, except for the fact that he was an alcoholic.
Right.
But the mother is she was definitely a main person in this case as far as, the abuse that the children received early on in their lives.
Totally. I think she was really controlling throughout their lives, and I think that's a factor that sort of always is weighing in during this entire story. Like these moments, when their mother mistreated them, really, really sunk deep with them, and that followed them their whole life. You can tell just in their attitudes, as we'll explain later. But
yeah, and she literally tried to control them too. She used mind tricks, and she used everything that she could to be as a manipulative person to try and control her children. And yet she didn't want anything from them except to control them and use them as she and money as she saw fit. So like I said, Amelia was born in 1901, Christine in 1905, and Lea in 1911. When Christine was born in 1905, like we said, Clemence, sorry, she didn't really want to have kids. I mean, when Amelia was born, she really didn't want to take care of Amelia at all either, right?
Right.
And when Christine was born, it was sort of like, okay, this is too much. 2 kids, I cannot do this.
Right.
So she sent Christine off to live with Gustav's sister. And then when Leia was born in 1911, it came out that Amelia actually had been raped by Gustav. And Gustav and Clemence, they got a divorce. But the weird thing is Clemence blamed Amelia for being raped by her father.
Yeah, I found this really troubling. Like, I don't know if she was used as a scapegoat for her sort of anger, or if, she actually believed this herself.
I don't really think that she believed this. I think that, she had already gotten rid of Christine. And so what happened whenever this came out, she blamed Amelia for being raped. And so she sent Amelia to a convent to be taught by nuns.
Right.
And so I think this was just a way of getting her out of the house as well. This was an easy way to blame her for her own rape and say, well, you know what? This is your fault, and now you're going to go be taught by nuns.
Yeah.
And this convent that she was sent to was a very strict place of learning. Obviously, I mean, this is in the early 1900s in France. Being taught by nuns, it's going to be a strict environment.
Definitely. I also want to say here, too, that their mother, Clemence, was at least said to have had cheated on their father as well. So they were both using each other. It wasn't a good family environment at all. When these girls got sent away to the nunnery, it was the best thing that could have happened to them, honestly, to get them out of that environment.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it was like she wanted to get them out for punishment. And instead, what happened is, it was amazing for them. And so Amelia was at the convent, and Clemence said, we're going to take Christine out from her aunt's house, because she had already sent her off to Gustav's sister's house.
Right.
And so she sent Christine to the convent as well. So now Amelia and Christine, they were both in this convent being taught by nuns.
I guess we should also mention, after the girls get sent to the nunnery, Clemence then sends her third child, Leia, to live with a great uncle. So at this point, she has gotten rid of all of her children.
Yeah, again, she doesn't want to be a mother. She had 3 kids over the course of 10 years, so it's not like she ever stopped.
Yeah.
And if Gustav is raping Leia, who's to say that he didn't also... I didn't really read anything about this.
Sure.
But who's to say that he didn't also rape his own wife?
Yeah.
So who really knows?
And I think Clemence really was mad at Gustav for the man he had become, and she decided to be done with the entire situation, get all of her kids out, divorce him, and move on and cut her losses. That's at least how it seemed to me. That's completely me speculating, but that's how it read itself.
Yeah, but she didn't really want to move on from her children. She just didn't want to be around them.
Sure, fair enough.
And
yeah.
so
she could benefit off of them. She would keep them around.
Exactly. And because what happens next is Amelia took her vows and actually became a nun. And Christine wanted to follow in her footsteps. But this was bad for Clemence, because what she wanted, what their mother wanted to do, is basically her mother wanted to have all 3 of her children work as live-in maids to support her. So she didn't want to be around her children, and she didn't want a husband or whatever, and she didn't want to work. She wanted all 3 of her children to be maids and basically work for her existence.
Right.
But that's Amelia's out. She took her vows, she became a nun. So she can't. So Clemence already lost 1 child to this. She doesn't want to risk the gravy train from her other 2 children.
Right, yeah. The mother's fear is she can't essentially capitalize on one of her children. That was, a third of her income going out the door.
Exactly. So she took Christine out of the convent, and she basically made her work as a live-in maid.
Yeah. Now, I guess we should talk a little bit about Amelia and Christine when they actually are at this nunnery. like we said earlier, it was sort of like a blessing for them to be able to go to this place and be rid of the negativity that sort of paralyzed them through their childhood. So when they get to this nunnery, they are said to have flourished. They fit right into a structured environment, and they seem to have been very happy, honestly.
And so, yeah, and before Christine could take her vows as well and become a nun, again, Clemence moved her into a position and got her a job. And she got her a job sort of at like a middle class house. And Christine really liked what she was doing, and she liked the family that she was working for, but they didn't pay enough to support Clemence. So she went and got Christine a job at a much more wealthy house.
Right. This actually happened a couple times, they said. She would move from place to place because her mother didn't approve. Again, very controlling.
Yeah, I mean, the mother is using her children or attempting to use her children for as long and as deep as possible. She wants to take all of the money. And that's why she, when you think about it, that's why she wants them to become live-in maids.
Sure.
Because a live-in maid doesn't have to pay rent necessarily or electricity or anything. Right. They do, but it comes out of their salary. So what ends up happening is that they can live, like Christine could be a live-in maid and completely live in her own room, while doing all the maid's chores,
right,
but still send all of the money to her mother.
Yeah.
And so it's not like she would have to lose out on a bunch of money on surviving because she's already doing that.
She was already taken care of. They fed her. At least that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to feed your maids. So, she was living for free essentially, and then getting the rest of all of her money stolen. So sad, man.
Exactly.
So as Christine is sort of moving from different job to different job, eventually the youngest daughter, Lea, is pushed out of her uncle's house that she was staying at. And their mother, Clemence, finds Lea a job as well, working as a live-in maid in Le Mans. So the two sisters are together for the first time. You got to think about this. These two girls have almost been separated their entire lives. They haven't really spent a lot of time with each other. So when they do finally meet, Christine gets to act as a big sister, and she gets, they just end up bonding really well. They spend a lot of time together, and they seem to just hit it off right away.
Yeah, and they're not working at the same place yet. So Christine is working somewhere else and Lea is working somewhere else. They're working for separate families, but
right,
in their free time, they seek each other out and they start hanging out a lot and they become very close that way. And so before they even work together or live together, they start becoming close.
I think it said, they got like either 1 or 2 days a week where they had basically had a half day off, and they would either spend, they always spent all of their time with each other, but they were either, together shopping or whatever, or, at church, but they were always together.
Exactly.
So in 1926, Christine has become a live-in maid, essentially. She found a new job at the house of Monsieur Lancelin and his family, and they're basically, it consists of him. He's a lawyer at this time. He's very affluent. The family has money. They're doing well. So it's him. It is his wife, Leonie. And they also have 2 children, but only one child is living with them at this time, and her name is Genevieve. So eventually, a few months later, Christine convinces the Lancelin family, essentially after, a couple months of hard work and dedication, she convinces the family to hire her sister as a chambermaid. So the 2 girls are very lucky. They essentially get to be together, forever now. They both have a job together. They get to watch over each other and hang out all the time. Yeah. And for the most part, it seems like they're having a good time here. I think the time at the nunnery really did them well. They're suited for this type of life. They're very neat and cleanly. They're not loud. As far as we can tell, these girls didn't like to go out dancing and have a great time or try and find suitors. They
Yeah,
just
and
cared about themselves.
yeah, and they really just wanted they wanted to be with each other. Yeah, they didn't really want to find anyone. And like you said, they went to church a lot and they went shopping, but that's basically it. A lot of the owners of the shops that they went to said they were very cold and distant, and they were very into one another. And they even went to a fortune teller on a regular basis who told them that they had been a husband and wife in a past life.
Yeah, strange.
And I don't know how much stock you can put into this. I mean, obviously it's a fortune teller, but what I mean by that is, I don't know if they really believed that, or if they took that in, because they did become very, very close, as we'll talk about later.
Right.
But I'm not sure how much they really took that in. But maybe they really believed this fortune teller. I mean, they went back to this fortune teller many times, and they kind of solidified the fact that they were husband and wife in a past life.
Yeah, I can see them buying into it, and why not? I'm sure they love to have more reasons to protect each other and look over one another too. That just reinforces all of their feelings they had.
For sure. So yeah, they did a really good job at the Lancelin house. They worked a lot. They worked long hours. They didn't really, if they had days off, they had half a day off, but they would work, 13, 14 hours a day, and then just kind of, go to their room and go to sleep.
Yeah, and chambermaids work 24/7. You know what I mean? You always got to take a chamber pot out,
yeah, for
especially
sure.
in a big household.
And so the Lancelins believed that they were very blessed. And so, even one of Christine's last employers had fired her after 15 days because she didn't really like to do any hard chores, or she gave a lot of talking back whenever something had to be done. She kind of looked. This was said by her last employer that she kind of looked down at certain jobs.
Right.
But that's really the only one I could find. That they talked badly about Christine as a worker.
Right. This sort of makes sense to me. I was trying to think this through too earlier. I think a lot of this plays in with the church life as well. She probably had a high disgust trait, you know what I mean? So anything she felt like was, I'm not going to do that. It just makes sense to me to see her act that way, basically. Like she was above certain chores.
Yeah. And the sisters began to look up at Madame Lancelin as a mother figure. And they wouldn't even call their actual mother their mother. They would call her that other woman. Madame Lancelin found out that all of the wages she had been paying the sisters were actually going to their mother. And she told them to stop. And she also took it upon herself to speak to Clemence, the mother, and let her know that her gravy train was over. And so things seem to be going well between the family and the sisters, and she seems to be getting along very well with Leonie.
Yeah, they finally got a taste of normalcy, even though, it was their job. But, I don't blame them for disavowing their mother. They probably woke up one day and they were told by Leonie that basically, hey, she's taking advantage of you guys.
Exactly. And they, so they would end up working for this family for years. And, for a couple years, things really seemed to go okay. They got along really well. But what do you think about how Leonie started treating the sisters eventually?
Well, that's the thing. So the first couple of years seemed pretty well. And as time goes by, it's hard to tell if the Poppin sisters got laxed with their chores or if maybe Leonie was annoyed with them. But for whatever reason, the maids were starting to get abused, essentially. They were getting pinched. They were getting slapped,
It was emotional and physical abuse.
Yeah, I think the story is told that if Lea had actually missed a piece of paper when she was sweeping or something like that, and she was made to, kneel down and collect,
While
the
being
little piece of
pinched.
paper. Yeah, exactly. And just being all around mean, honestly. And so I was thinking about this, and we're about to explain the murders that took place, but once this violence seems to ramp up a little bit, the abuse, um, I think that that really triggers the Poppin sisters. You know, they came from an abusive household, they escaped it, and now it's starting to turn the other way. And this family that they trusted, Leone, who they call mother, is now abusing them. And I really think that that puts things on edge, you know?
Of course, I mean that starts to remind them of how that how they were raised.
Right,
And so then there's this big thing, and Leia even said to Christine that if Leone was going to pinch one of them again, she was going to defend herself and fight back next time.
right. And I don't blame her, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. So the murders happened on February 2nd of 1933. Madame Lancelin and her daughter Genevieve went out for the day, kind of like they normally do. They went shopping. They went to, do whatever they did, during the day on a work week. And the father went to, his office like normal. And at some point, Leia, as they were doing their daily chores, tried to plug in an iron, and it shorted out the electricity. So whenever Leone and Genevieve came home and the house was in complete darkness, it was a shock to them both. And Christine had actually tried to meet them at the door as they were coming home to try to explain, like, hey, this is what happened. We didn't do anything bad. We didn't do anything wrong. It's just, things happen. Well, that sent Leone into a complete rage. And this is something that, of course, Christine and Leia had talked about in the past. They said, if she wants to physically abuse or attack us again, we're not going to put up with it.
Right, and this just so happened to be that the day prior to this event happening, the iron did the same thing. They had to get the iron fixed. So this was like this was just, sugar, icing on the cake, as they say.
Exactly. Yeah, so after Leone comes home and she freaks out, this is something that Christine and Leia have sort of been waiting on, because they know that next time that she freaks out and tries to physically abuse them, they're going to fight back.
Right.
Right. So, Christine takes a pewter jug and hits Leone over the head, and with this big jug, and it's a bludgeon. It's a very bad hit.
Blunt force trauma.
Exactly. And Christine basically takes control over everything. And Genevieve comes in and tries to fight, and that's when Christine tells Leia to smash the madam's face into the ground and rip her eyes out. And then Christine goes and takes care of Genevieve, and Christine rips her eyes out as well. So now we have, Madame Leone and her daughter Genevieve on the ground, bludgeoned with their eyes removed from their head.
They're still alive. They're incapacitated, but they're...
Yeah, they're still alive. They're screaming and they're saying all these things. And later it comes out that the sisters heard them yelling and heard them, calling out for help, basically, and they just ignored it, obviously.
Right. I guess we should mention, after they get bludgeoned and their eyes get taken out, the two sisters then go to the kitchen and grab a big knife and a hammer, and they stab both of the ladies in their backside and all over their calves as well.
Yeah, and they beat the faces in of both of them with the hammer. And when they find the hammer later, there was actual brain matter
and
on
hair.
This hammer, and hair and everything. And then they also take the sisters, and basically they take menstrual blood from Genevieve and rub all over their legs. I'm sorry, this is very brutal.
Right.
All over their legs, sort of as it looks like a baste, and it looks like as if they were preparing to cook them. There was an actual rabbit recipe that they found that they had been looking up, and it looks like they were trying to prepare them for this recipe. Who knows? It probably would have never gone that far,
right?
Because after this, they started to clean up the crime scene, and then they just went to the restroom and got everything ready for bed, and went up to their room, locked the door, and got in bed.
Yeah, and stayed there. So strange.
Yeah. And they, before they did all this, they also locked up the entire house. Of course, the house was in total darkness because of the electricity.
Right.
So now, to recap, you have this murder scene, this insanely brutal uh, murder scene. They're missing their eyes, their faces are smashed in beyond recognizable, and the sisters are just up in their room sleeping.
Yeah, so during this time, Monsieur Lancelot basically is out at his brother-in-law's dinner party, right? He's not even home. He's sort of out and about. And when the wife and daughter don't show up, he is worried, obviously. So he heads to the residence, he heads to the house to check up on them, and he finds the house completely dark. He can see that there's one light on in the maid's room, but all the doors are locked and he can't get into the house.
And that light came from just a single candle that the sisters had lit whenever they went up to bed.
Yeah, so they end up going to the police station.
It took 2 hours. I read at a couple sources. It took him 2 hours to actually. I guess he just couldn't make it into the house.
Right.
And so it took him 2 hours to actually go to the police station and ask for help. And so when they went and got the police came. They couldn't get into the house right at first either, but they jumped over the fence into the back area, and they got in by basically wedging through a parlor door open into the house. And there were no lights because everything was cut off again, so they used a flashlight to search the house. And as one of the cops is walking through one of the hallways, I believe the downstairs hallway, they come across what he thinks is a marble, but he soon realizes it is an eyeball.
Brutal.
And so the police officers go downstairs and basically say, tell Monsieur Lancelot not to come into the house. And he was also with a friend from the dinner party as well, so they both came to the house to try to get in. So both of these people, Lancelot, the father, and his friend, could not come into the house while they still searched because they didn't know if this person was still in the house ready to kill. They figured that the maids were dead as well,
right,
somewhere in the house.
Yeah, they figured probably they were expecting to find a murderer in their room, essentially, or an intruder, I guess I should say. They did find murders in their room, but it was the maids. So
they were expecting that whoever did this was still in the house.
Right. They try and search the house. They spend a lot of the time. They get up to the maid's room and they're trying to open the door and it's locked. So they end up calling a locksmith. And when the locksmith shows up, he's able to basically get the door open, turns the handle, and they find the two sisters there together in bed. I've heard two different stories. I heard they were naked in one story, and then I heard that they were wearing a bathrobe in the other, but I guess it's irrelevant.
Pretty much everything I heard was that they were in bathrobes. Mm-hmm. I think maybe I heard one of the things that you did that said they were naked, but I read and listened to at least 6 or 7 different things on this case, and I think pretty much almost every one of them said bathrobe.
Right.
And they called it something else in French, but it was basically just a bathrobe. But yeah, so they're up in their room, they're laying in bed together, just in their bathrobes.
Their night attire and a knife next to the bed.
Exactly, the knife and the hammer.
Right.
They found both of those murder weapons in their room. And the sisters confessed immediately. When the police walked in, I believe Christine said, "Oh, we've been expecting you," or something like that. And they both confessed, but they claimed self-defense. They said, they attacked us first and we simply were fighting, for ourselves. And they both also confessed solely for the crime, and they would not implicate one another. So they both said that I did this alone, or
right.
That, yeah, exactly. So it was just each one of them confessed to everything. And Lea even said, while they were still in the room, when one of the police officers asked, what happened, she said, "I'm deaf and dumb," and then looked at her sister and smiled. And so it was like, I think what really happened was when the police officer asked Leia, what happened, Christine kind of glanced at her and said, "Don't tell him." And
Right.
Leia was like, and
Giving
Leia's-
her some cue to like, hey, let's get our story straight here.
Exactly. So they were both protecting each other, which makes sense because we've already sort of gone over like how close exactly they were.
So the trial of the Poppin sisters would begin in September of 1933. I guess we should mention, first and foremost, this trial was basically a fanfare of the day. I mean, it was ridiculous. Crowds of people came to sit outside the courthouse and wait for the verdict and hear about what happened to these sisters. They were highly publicized for these murders, and the city of Le Mans actually has to have police outside of the courthouse to control the crowd because they were, it was essentially a mob hanging outside of the courthouse.
Yeah, I mean, overnight the sisters became famous in France,
Right.
and it was a big controversy because a lot of the public and some of the highly known intellectuals of the time, and like I said, a lot of the public was sort of on the side of the sisters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
People like Simone de Beauvoir and a whole bunch of French philosophers and intellectuals that basically pointed out this dynamic between the bourgeois, which is essentially like a mid to upper class, affluent type of person. So they essentially said that this was because of the systems that were put in place. They forced these girls to do it. It was going to happen regardless. When you put people above others, it only forces violence and jealousy and hatred and envy.
Yeah, so that was a big thing of the day, and a lot of the public agreed with these people. And so, a lot of them came to, like you said, they sort of filed outside of the courtroom just to hear the verdict.
Right.
And of course, there was no TV or cell phones or anything like that, so you had to go there and hear it, or read about it or whatever. So, a lot of people showed up so they could know as quickly as possible.
And I think the public actually had a different idea of the ladies just in general. I think once their story sort of blew up, people do what they always do, which is make like sort of fantastical stories and then start to have these ideas in their head and form opinions that aren't necessarily well informed, but
they're not true at all.
So during the trial, these sisters basically state the same story they told the police in the beginning. They said that they were accosted and they were going, an argument developed between them, and Christine lashed out, and then Leia jumped in.
Mm-hmm. And what was the thing too is they claimed self-defense. So they claimed that they were being physically abused by Leone, and so it took Christine to fight back at this one particular instance, which kind of blew up into this full-on fight. And so there were in this trial. There were three separate medical experts, and they examined the sisters. They examined them all separately. They all came to the same conclusion that the sisters were in fact sane, because the defense was claiming insanity on this case. They were claiming that they were insane. This is the way that they thought they could get the sisters off. The family had a history of mental illness. The grandfather would go into these fits of rage and anger, and they had a cousin that committed suicide. And so they used all of this as leverage to say that, well, the sisters are obviously insane. And if you look at pictures of these two women,
you'd buy it.
You'd buy it, dude. They look in. I mean, I don't mean to be insensitive, but they do look the part.
They do.
And they act the part in trial and in court as well. They sort of stare off into blank spaces, and they come off very, quote unquote, insane.
Yeah, distant, non-responsive. Yeah, I think there's even one point where they get called up to speak for themselves, and they actually don't at all. They just don't talk.
Yeah, and so the experts examined the sisters and deemed them sane. And, they said that they carried out the crime in such meticulous detail, and they cleaned up everything. They knew basically exactly what they were doing.
Totally.
They basically went through with everything in a complete and sound mind. But the weird thing is the mutilations and the preparation of the bodies for cooking wasn't really, mentioned by the experts.
Right.
And I don't really know how big of a deal this is, because the reason I say this is because it could come off as making the sisters look more insane. But the problem is the experts don't have to say this. The experts can take this into account, the mutilations and everything, and still deem them to be sane.
Right, sure. To me, the period blood didn't suggest that, they were trying to baste, but like I just would have thought it was like desecrating the body. It was just like.
And that's probably more of what it was.
Right.
Yeah.
And which shows even more motive. They were angry. They were like getting back.
Mm-hmm. So what was the verdict?
So eventually, and inevitably, honestly, the two Poppin sisters are found guilty, and Christine is sentenced to death, and Lea was given a sentence of 10 years imprisonment with hard labor.
Yeah, and they did this, I think, because Christine was really viewed as the main force behind this attack.
Right.
And if when they interviewed the sisters and the experts kind of go over everything with the sisters, they find out that Lea, who we didn't mention this, Lea has a below average intelligence of about 80, and Christine has a very average intelligence of in the late 90s. And so they find Lea to be very controlled and manipulated.
Yeah, she's submissive.
Exactly. And so they only give her 10 years, like you said.
Right.
Christine is sentenced to death by the guillotine.
So after the sisters get sent to prison, obviously they're separated, and almost immediately Christine's health starts to degenerate. They're very sad that they can't be with each other. They're reported to have asked for each other quite often. Christine's not eating. She wouldn't listen to anyone. She would have fits of rage. At one point, she tried to tear her own eyes out, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Well, and the people that were in the jail at this point, whenever they see this happen, they compare it to, and it may have even been like a medical expert went to see her, and said they said that the bit of rage that she went through when she tried to rip out her own eyes was basically exactly the same as what happened during the murders.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense to me completely.
Yeah, and so they were eventually allowed to see each other. The warden of the prison basically let them see each other one day. And this is really, really weird. Christine made strong sexual advances on Lea. And we say Christine's health deteriorated, but it was just mostly Christine. It wasn't really Lea. I mean, Lea was missing her sister for sure.
Sure.
But Christine was really missing her sister.
Mm-hmm.
And she seemed to be the main one that this was really taking its toll on her.
Yeah, and she was the quote protective one of the group. All she wanted to do was really protect her sister. But I mean, like you just said, so when they finally get to meet, they have basically Christine tells her to undress and begs her for sex, which is so strange, man. It makes me think, like last week we were talking about this, where siblings will get split up, and if they spend a lot of their life away from each other, when they meet up, there's this weird phenomena where they are attracted to each other and they become inseparable. And that really seems to be the theme here as well.
Yeah, that exactly happened. Like we said, Christine was sent out to a convent to be taught by nuns, and along with her sister Amelia, and Lea was sent to her great uncle. So they spent a majority of their early life in basically no contact with one another.
Right.
And like we said earlier, when they met up, they had an instant connection. They became very, very close.
I was thinking about this as well. When they got caught and they were found in the bed together, I couldn't figure out if, they had their own separate beds or if they shared a bed. I couldn't find anything stating this, but I mean, if they had separate beds and they were in the same bed, I mean, that would be weird.
So maybe, yeah, exactly. So maybe they've been sleeping together this entire time.
Right.
who knows? It was one of those things where Christine had so much control over Leia that she probably could have gotten whatever she wanted. So I think it's very safe to say that stuff was going on even before the murders. They were definitely, I think that they definitely had slept together probably quite often. And Christine was kind of the one controlling everything, just like she always had.
Right.
So Christine was issued a stay of execution by the president, Albert Lebrun, and she was resentenced and given life of hard labor. So now she's not, meant to be killed anymore.
Right, which is a huge improvement, going all the way from death penalty to, I mean, it's still hard labor for the rest of your life, but you're not being put to death. Mm-hmm. There's some sort of sympathy happening there.
Yeah, for something. But she only lasted 3 years in hard labor before she was sent to a mental hospital. And after she wasn't allowed to see Leia, she stopped eating and wasted away very quickly.
Yeah, that's actually, there's a medical term for it, but she essentially died of pulmonary problems from not eating.
Mm-hmm. So she was extremely depressed, more depressed probably than I've ever seen anyone, because she'd stopped eating forever.
Right. She had lost all she loved, So she dies at the age of 32 in 1937 at the mental institution. So after this, Leia is actually released from prison 8 years after serving. She was sentenced to 10, but she gets let off early for good behavior. Mm-hmm. Again, in the prison, she's known to be a very nice, gentle, soft-spoken, passive person.
And she doesn't... It doesn't look like she misses Christine nearly as much as Christine misses her.
Right. I thought that was weird too, and I wonder why. That just leads me to believe, she was being abused by her sister as well.
For sure, man. It seriously looks like she finally was able to understand what was happening and what Christine had sort of done, and that she had been under the control of her sister for so long, and now that she's out of it, it seems like she's doing much, much better.
And it's pretty amazing that she got released 8 years after murdering 2 people. That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
In a place like where we live, I don't think it would matter what you did. If you killed 2 people, you're not going anywhere.
We live in Texas, so they kill you back.
Yeah, exactly. So after she gets out, she begins living with her mother. She goes under a different name and tries to live the most low-key life as possible and just live out her days.
But what does she do for work?
Yeah, this is the crazy thing. So after she gets out of prison, this girl's 31 years old. What does she do? She gets a job working as a maid again. Yep. Insane, man.
She goes back to being a maid, and she, like Stefan said, she's living under a different name. She basically becomes a different person and lives with her mother and works as a maid. And the thing is, did you find any, Stefan, any information about their relationship? And by that I mean Leia's and her mother's after prison.
No, I couldn't really find anything.
Yeah, which is crazy. But so she goes back and lives with her abusive, manipulative, using mother.
Right, but also weakened and frail at this point. I mean, let's face it.
And then goes to work as a maid. I mean,
it's the cycle starts all over again.
It definitely seems like that. And so we don't know really when Leia died. It's said to be in the 70s or something like that. She seemed to die in maybe her mid 60s to early 70s or so. There is a picture of her as an old lady. However, I looked at this picture, and I can't really tell.
This was weird. I wanted to talk to you about this because, what I read is that she probably had died in 82. Mm-hmm. However, after there was a documentarian who essentially said that he had found her in the year 2000 and she was still alive. I
read that too.
This would have made her like 93 or close to that age, 92, somewhere around there.
It's not impossible, but
I mean, it's just weird that he would say that, but yet he was a documentarian, but yet we can't find the information anywhere.
Yeah, there's no images. You didn't take a picture?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, someone took a picture supposedly when she was, when she became elderly. There was a picture taken of her.
What a documentarian.
Yeah. And so it's now believed that the sisters suffered from a condition called folie à deux. Is that how you pronounce that?
That's close enough for us.
And that translates to madness in pairs. I have a feeling that is not how you pronounce that. So
I think it was good,
yeah.
man.
So basically, it is a condition where a pair of people, or even more people, it could be 3 or 4, it could be a group of people, but a lot of times it's just a pair of people. They become sort of isolated from society, and they start to have a very paranoid outlook on the world while trusting in themselves.
Right.
Very, very
they
much
retreat
so.
into themselves and push out everyone else in their life and start, to get paranoid delusions that people are after them. It's really common in serial killer couples, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
They form this all the time, they depend on each other and so much.
Yeah, so the sisters had this actual condition, and it really seems like the condition, as I said before, really affected Christine much more than Lea. She was the main person that this condition really, really felt. I mean, she was the dominant one of the pair, and the thing about this condition is one of the people out of the pair usually dominates the other. And that's
Right.
how it usually always is. And so this case
Sure.
is a perfect example of this condition. So there are other cases that sort of this condition sort of applies to. There was twin sisters, Ursula and Sabina Eriksson. Ursula ran into the path of an oncoming trolley and sustained severe injuries. Sabina then immediately duplicated her twin's actions by stepping into the path of the oncoming car. So both sisters survived the incident with severe but non-life-threatening injuries.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah, it was later claimed that Sabina was a secondary sufferer of this condition, which is sort of like Lea. It's it's the
Right.
same thing. The one person's much more dominant, so she does something, and the other one does something as well.
Sure.
And Sabina later told an officer at the police station, "We say in Sweden that an accident rarely comes alone. Usually at least one more follows, maybe 2." So, when she was released from the hospital, she behaved erratically before stabbing a man to death. So this
Yeah.
was a big deal. I mean, she actually ended up murdering somebody whenever she wasn't with her sister.
Sounds like it. That doesn't sound like a rational statement.
No, so this condition really can affect a lot of people, and it affected these sisters quite insanely, and Christine especially, and it kind of forced the hand on them to commit these murders.
Yeah, I guess we should also mention like the story of the Poppin sisters, of these 2 girls, really had a huge impact on French culture as well. I mean, there are a ton of plays and poems and literature. There was actually a movie in 2000 released called Murderous Maids about this case.
Mm-hmm.
So I had never heard of it, honestly, prior to this, but there's a lot out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I hadn't heard of this until I started doing research on a lot of stuff, and I just came across it very randomly on Reddit, like I come across most things.
Right.
And I'm very glad I did, because it's a very interesting case on the sufferers of this sort of condition, or at least how they come into it this way, and then it can kind of force them to do these unspeakable, commit these unspeakable crimes.
Right. I had some weird feelings at the beginning of this case. I sort of sided with the sisters, and I thought, you back a hungry dog or an injured dog into a corner, don't be surprised if it bites you, and that's what I felt like, Miss Lancelot had done.
Mm-hmm.
I really felt that, these people were abused and broken people, essentially, who were trying to get their stuff together, and they were put right back into abuse, which just triggered a lot of emotions. And because she was so protective of her sister, she wasn't going to take it. So I really sided with them. But, I've sort of...
That doesn't. I can see why they would fight back, but it doesn't really push them to the point of ripping the eyes out.
Yeah, it was just so
It was way too
extreme.
gruesome.
It's such an extreme act to do to
Exactly.
somebody, and to leave a family without 2 members.
Exactly. Yeah. So, like I say at the end of probably every episode, Google this for yourself, look it up. I think we gave you a pretty good, basic story about this case. It's very interesting. Again, I'm sorry if we butchered some of the
We did our
names.
best.
Yeah, we did our best. So next week, what are we doing?
So next week is John Liss, just in time for Father's Day.
Yeah, a little bit before Father's Day, but I think when I've known about this case for a while. I've known the name, but I never really did a lot of research on it until a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to really dig into it, and I could not believe everything that had happened. It's like a fictional story. It's like a movie.
Totally.
It's really hard to even believe it happened. It's something that would never happen nowadays. So next week we're covering John List, which is a much bigger case than tonight's, but I still think that it's very interesting, and I think a lot of people don't know every detail to it, so we're going to try to do that one a lot of justice. And so that will be out next week.
Don't forget, everyone, like and subscribe that Facebook page. We would appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and again, send us an email to thestrangelandpodcast at gmail.com if you have anything you want to say, we want to talk. If you send us an email just saying that we mispronounced some names, just don't send us that email. Just kidding. Yeah, send us an email about anything you want to talk about. We're on iTunes, we're on Google Play, we're on Stitcher, we're on everything. We're on whatever device you're listening to us now. So check us out on everything. We're also on YouTube. If you just type in the Strangeland Podcast, you'll see our logo come up. And so just check out all of our videos on there.
Thanks, everybody.